Welcome to Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. I'm your host, Kim Todd, and on Digging Deeper, we have in-depth discussions with extension and industry experts about those important landscape topics. Tonight, we're going to hear about excluding critters. Thank you for joining us once again for Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. We're always happy to have Dennis on, and we're really happy to have him back to talk about exclusion. He's brought a friend and colleague to help, Andy Little from the School of Natural Resources. They're both going to give us all that good insight on keeping those furry critters out of our landscapes and gardens. So Dennis, last time we talked a great deal about rodents because you had a display of dead rodents.
Stuffed rodents, yes.
Yes, and so today we're talking about bats.
Right.
Which is a rodent.
No, it is not.
Nope.
Bats are the most common mammal of all species of mammals. And what we see around Nebraska, we have 13 species, but there's only one that gets in homes, and that's the big brown bat. And it's an insect feeder. And yes, they can carry some diseases. They're noted to be really bad carriers of rabies, but that's a misnomer. The percentage is fairly low, but you don't want to get bit by them. You have to get bit by them to have a problem. But this time of year, end of July and August, the young of the year, the ones that were born and with the mother in the nursery, all spring and June are now leaving, and they're confused. And they're flying in and out of houses, and they're doing all sorts of things. So we want to kind of stop them. And this is the best time. Now for bats, really exclusion is your best and only method. Repellents out there, been tested, hardly any effectiveness. There are no poisons because you have to have a poison live insect if you're going to bait for them. And the poisons that were kind of like a dust or fogs, those have all been pretty much off the market because they would kill people just as much as bats. And so no using cyanide or frost toxin or anything like that. We want to keep the family alive, and the bats probably would still be alive, but the family wouldn't. So if you use those things. So what we want to do is once get them out. So now is the time that we say let them fly until July, and then in July is when, start of July, you can start to exclude them. The first thing you want to do is make sure they're out of the attic. So every night they're doing a warm-up lap, and they're leaving the house, the attic, or the barn, or wherever, and they're feeding, and they're coming back. Well now, since they're all leaving, even the young of the year, we can do our exclusion. And there's several. If you have a small area, this is called a bat cone. And this is a bat cone for a corner. And what it does, it allows the bats to leave. Okay, so this is a chase into the crack in the house. And they come out this small opening. They can squeeze through that, yes. But they can't figure out how to get back in that. Same thing with this one. They can get that corner. They can get through that. They come out, but they can't figure out how to go back. And if there's a lot of them and you want to catch them and translocate them, you can do that on a larger scale, where this can be with something like a dryer vent. If it's a large hole, the bats come out at night, they're in here, then you can slide this closed, they're out of the house, and then you can open it and release them after you plug up that hole. And they're going to kind of always come to the same hole. And if you have a long crack in the house or the fascia and they're coming out, here's a thing that really works well. So here's the crack in the house that's almost too big to put a cone on or one spot. Hang bird netting over it with a little piece of 1x. These are just fishing weights. And what happens, the bats all come out, they hit the netting, they drop down, go out and do their feeding, and they come back and they can't get in because the netting's in the way. Then that next day, or I would do it, let the netting or the cone stay for 2 or 3 days, you just patch this up. Now, you can patch it up with caulk, and it's best, even though they can't chew through much, is to put something like copper wool, which is somewhat expensive, or steel wool. Now, this is steel wool with stainless steel in it. That's the brightness, so it doesn't rust, and it lasts forever. And, of course, the copper won't rust. But if you use just a good caulk and patch up any crack that is probably a 1/4 inch, okay, or bigger, that would take care of them. Now, another place bats get into is your fireplace. So this is the time of year you want to get them out. Way to do it at night, they're going to leave that fireplace. And so one of those cool nights that we had like last week, start a fire in the fireplace, even though it's the summer. Okay, just real quickly at night, and that'll make sure they're all gone. Then, once they're gone, put a cap on that.
So the tricky part about getting a cap on a fireplace is to find somebody to put the cap on the fireplace.
Right, you have to have that lined up before you exclude them.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly. Otherwise, you're going to be doing that over and over again.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's go back to the crack real quick
Yeah.
before we let Andy talk. So there's the crack. Are you assuming that the bat then goes into the crack
Right,
and
so-
into the house?
Right, because say this is
Yeah.
the inside, this is the attic over here,
Yeah.
okay? And the bats are coming out, in and out, and they usually use a small crack like this.
Right.
And the way to do this is to look at night around dusk and see where they're leaving.
Right. So if you don't see light through that crack, that's simply the siding is there and there's
Right,
something behind
right,
it, and
yeah.
you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you definitely, that's why you can see the
Yeah.
orange tape on the other side through that.
I would assume that the bird netting would also work. People get bats in the shutters or behind the shutters.
right.
Would that work for?
Yep, you can staple this behind the shutters, then they can only live in those louvers.
Right.
And not too many can do that, and they're somewhat exposed, and that would help tremendously. But outside, behind the shutters, let them be. What's the problem? They're eating insects.
Exactly.
They're not doing any problem. All they'll do is leave some bat droppings. Yes, I brought bat droppings with me. Why wouldn't I?
Exactly. And I'm wearing bat droppings.
Right. Reason why Kim said that for years, not recently,
now.
bat droppings, because they sparkle, because they have insect exoskeletons in them, people use them as mascara. Okay?
Or at least it was an ingredient in mascara.
Right, an ingredient in mascara.
Yeah.
And we believe, I don't have a lot of data on this, that's why we have that saying, that girl's batting her eyes at me.
Oh boy, I never thought about that. I gave you the opening and you just went right for it.
What would you expect?
Exactly. Oh, well, we want to make sure you watch us on Facebook Live and give us your comments. This is really a fun, interesting show to be able to supplement Backyard Farmer because, of course, we have 20 minutes to be able to talk about one or two subjects as opposed to that little 2 or 3 minute sort of thing. And, of course, that is through NET's website or Backyard Farmer. Really great for us to hear from you on that. All right, Andy Little, this is your debut with anything to do with Backyard Farmer.
That's right.
And you also are talking about excluding a critter that may or may not be an urban critter, but is more urban, suburban, and now acreage, of course.
That's right, yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about white-tailed deer. And white-tailed deer are common throughout the state of Nebraska. A lot of folks have had interactions with them. Just either they're out hunting or just kind of out walking and seeing them in their neighborhood. And so a common question that we usually get, especially in urban areas, is how do you manage for white-tailed deer? They're eating my plants. They're in my yard regularly, and I'm trying to exclude them. And so there's a few things you can do to be able to address that. Particularly from the plant side of things, you want to be able to put in unpalatable plants. And there's actually on the UNL Wildlife Extension website, we have a link that you can go on there and you can find more information about unpalatable plants for white-tailed deer. Deer basically, there are things like you wouldn't want to put in apple trees, for example, in your yard. Deer are going to be drawn to those because, especially from the fruit side of things. Rose bushes, they like those as well. They'll come in there and consume them. And so you want to put in plants that are likely not going to be consumed. But I will note that deer like to eat everything. And so even if it's somewhat of an unpalatable, it's very likely that they still will do that. So a way to control them, if you do have them eating some of your unpalatable plants, is that you also can put sprays, deterrents around your house. And so there are some nice sprays. I believe we have a couple of them. One of them particularly, it's called Deer Away. One of the things that you put these out, they're come in different kinds. Some of them are powder, some of them are liquid based, and you can put them on your plants. And it's kind of a unique way of being able to try to deter them through usually smell or some type of maybe a spicy taste that they would experience, and so they want to avoid coming back to that. The unfortunate thing is These do work temporarily, maybe in the summer months, but when do deer typically browse on things? They like to browse a lot, obviously, throughout the year, but especially in the wintertime when there's not much out there for them. And so, unfortunately, these things don't work very well, especially when you get down to freezing temperatures. And then thinking about other options outside of sprays, we can also use things like fencing material around your yard. So we can think about, from a standpoint of putting something like this around your trees. And so essentially this would get put down into the ground around your tree. And so then the deer is not going to be consuming or trying to maybe rub their antlers on the bark of the tree, especially for the males once you get into September coming up here. So that's a huge issue. And so this is a great tool to be able to address that. You regularly will see these around trees, especially in nurseries around the state of Nebraska. And we basically put these around, we'll clamp them onto the tree. And we can basically just drop it down over, but sometimes you'll have, again, those spikes on the bottom or some way to hold them fast. And again, that'll prevent those deer from actually rubbing their antlers on them. Growing up in Pennsylvania, this is a common thing you'd see a lot in our fruit orchards that we'd have. Because farmers would regularly deal with deer rubbing their antlers on those fruit trees, and of course that's a big economic loss for them. So again, there's a few things that kind of thinking about logistics for controlling them in an urban setting. One thing to kind of think about when you're looking to tell whether it's actually deer or rabbit damage or some other type of rodent damage, typically what you're going to see from a deer's perspective is they're actually going to be, when they nip stuff off, if you can see this, essentially there's a lot of jagged edges on these bushes. And so the reason why is because deer don't have top teeth in their front incisors. So they have obviously their molars in the back, but they don't have top incisors. So think about if you didn't have your top teeth, how you would try to bite at stuff. Well, basically they pull at it, and so that creates these jagged edges. Whereas a rabbit will likely go up here and they would bite that completely off like you took a pair of scissors to it.
I did not know that.
So yeah.
All these years of talking about critters, I had no idea they didn't have any front teeth.
So yeah, that's a common thing that people always ask. And then the other thing about when you're looking for sign in your yard for deer, you would think about looking at droppings. And so deer typically are going to have basically about a 3/4 inch elongated dropping, whereas you're going to see more spherical, basically a circle for a rabbit. So if you're looking and saying, well, is this deer or is this rabbit? You're going to look for that elongated dropping for a deer versus the more spherical for a rabbit.
So pull the cone thing back up again. What are those cones? Where did you get those, and what are they made of? Because that's pretty intriguing. It's not so tight against the trunk of the tree that it's going to.
True.
It says recycled plastic.
I see that.
Yeah.
Which still doesn't tell me what it is. So it looks like half the cone that a dog would wear.
It's kind of one of the almost like a telescoping type.
Yeah.
Again, it's just a different design.
Yeah.
There's a variety of designs out there that people can use. The nice thing with this one, and again, it has these spikes, and that's the thing is you got to get this down into the ground, down to the base of the ground. So essentially, it would be sitting like this.
Right.
Otherwise, deer also can learn over time that they can pull on this and they can pull it away. And especially if it was something that was stuck up in the air, that they could take and get that off and then get after your tree.
So people who really do have a problem with deer, and there are a lot of them, how high does that protection need to be? And let's assume first no snow, and then let's assume snow.
So normally what you would have is for, deer can they can typically get up to about 6 feet in height when they're browsing on things. And so you want, those would be basically, if you had this type of cone, again, you'd want to have that at least a few feet off the, basically from the base of the ground up. So I'd say probably if you can get 3 to 4 feet would be ideal. Again, because they can browse that. Now, again, this is more from the trunk side of things, so they still can get up to those branches up there and be able to consume those leaves. And so, again, that's why we're trying to put, if you want to try in an urban setting especially, trying to put those deterrents in to try to keep them from getting up there, getting after those trees. So, again, putting unpalatable trees or unpalatable food resources for them in there.
And usually, by the time a tree gets to 6 foot, the caliper is bigger, the bark is bigger, and they're less likely to browse on it.
Correct.
But it still is the antlers.
The antlers
right?
can
That's
rub.
still
Antlers,
really,
they'll rub trees up
Right.
to telephone pole size or even bigger in some cases.
Right,
So.
exactly. Well, and I would think too, typically the branching height for orchard trees is about 3 to 4 feet.
Right,
and
sure.
then the spread. So you're almost, if you really want to protect those, especially if you're in an urban setting, close to where the, where the deer are actually in their native environment or a wild environment, you're going to have to do the cone thing and a fence, probably.
Or you can shock them.
Or you can shock them, and that is right.
Oh.
So there are some different ways.
Very well in those situations.
So there's a few different ways you can do it. Again, I'll exhibit this as one of them. So basically, this is stuck into the ground, and so essentially, what this does is you can put something like peanut butter, or you could some other tasty treat per se.
Apple butter.
There you go, apple butter, and something to track them in there. And then basically, this has a battery. It's battery powered, and so this will actually shock them when they put their nose up there. And their nose is very sensitive, so they recognize, oh, hey, I need to stay away from this area. So you can put these around, your plants, your trees, whatever, to be able to deter them over time.
So if you put them strategically just outside the tree's drip line,
Right.
okay, about every 6 to 10 foot, the deer come to that first, shock, and then they don't pass that line.
Right. So it's actually an electric fence without having to put in an electric
Right.
fence.
Exactly.
And I think
And
that
that's-
particular one takes 4 C cells.
Yeah.
And it's quite a shock to a deer. I've seen it on camera, and they just go right down to their knees and go, and run the other way.
Yeah.
It's funny. And then when your grandkids do it, it's even funnier.
A good training weapon.
Yeah.
And obviously, electric fence per se, you're not likely to be putting that in many urban
Right.
areas. But when you get into our agricultural areas, absolutely. A lot of farmers will use them. We can to be able to deter them, and there's different ways you can do it. Some of them actually have what they call as a 3-dimensional fence, and so basically it's kind of a design that confuse the deer, and when they walk up to it, and they're not sure if they can jump over that or not, and kind of again distracts them, and so they decide not to go into that area. But there are ways that you can basically, with electric fence, you can set it up, and then essentially as that animal is approaching it, you can have some things like, say, a piece of tin foil and with some peanut butter on there, and then they'll touch that, and then that, of course, zaps them, and hopefully will keep them out of your, whether that's your cornfield or your just home garden or whatever, to keep them out. Or some of the ways to do that. And then if you're a farmer and you're dealing a lot with deer damage, of course, Nebraska Game and Parks has a lot of great resources, and you can reach out to them. They have programs where they actually have you can sign up for an antlerless deer hunting to be able to go onto those farms to help with those crop damage issues. There are other opportunities, again, working with their state agency biologists to be able to resolve those crop depredation problems that they're having.
So since you brought up that Game and Parks is a really good resource also, is there such a thing as nuisance deer in town? Because we talk about other nuisance animals, and with that, again, if there's a deer that continues to make its way or their way into an area, do you call and somebody comes and gets them?
Not necessarily in city limits.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know on occasion we've had deer on East Camp.
Yeah,
Well,
we
still
have them
do.
all the time on East
Yeah,
Campus.
Yeah.
And I mean, there is permits for depredation on
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And I do know that years ago, one that was causing a lot of problems on East Campus was taken down by a professional.
Yeah. So there are ways.
So
to
there is
manage.
ways, but,
Yep.
but that's, you gotta remember, East Campus has a lot of open space with not a lot of houses.
Right.
It'd be very, very dangerous and not prudent to do that in a development, because you
Right.
you don't know where a bullet's gonna go.
Right. Exactly. And there's really no other way to
Right.
do it.
Well, and typically they would
Yeah.
have a trained law enforcement officer
Right,
doing that.
exactly.
I've had colleagues that have worked in urban settings, and particularly in sharp shooting situations where they've had overabundant deer populations, and they've had to bring in professionals with USDA Wildlife Services and other entities to be able to control deer.
Be able to do
So,
it. Yeah. Wow. Well, this went way too fast, and that was only 2 critters for exclusion. So we want to say thanks for all the good questions and all the good comments that you guys made about this. Thanks to both of you for coming in and talking to us today. We will be back next week with another in-depth horticulture discussion. Do be sure to watch Backyard Farmer live every Thursday at 7 Central on NET. Thanks for digging deeper with Backyard Farmer.